My name is Dale Hensley, 42 years old, licensed guide out of DuBois, Wyoming. I've been running hunts since I was 20. Elk, mule deer, the occasional bear permit. My outfit's called Hensley Wilderness Guide Services, but mostly it's just me, a few part-timers, and a pair of mules that don't like each other. Folks come out thinking they're stepping into a postcard, and I'm there to make sure they don't die in it. That's what guiding really is. Paid survival with manners. I keep meticulous logs, dates, weather tags, even what coffee I drank. It's habit, partly from my father who logged for the Forest Service, partly because things get strange out there, and the only way to stay sane is to write them down before your mind starts sanding off the edges. I never meant to publish these notes or tell anyone outside my small circle, but after last fall, I don't sleep well. Keeping quiet feels worse. It started the first week of October, just before the snowline crawled down the peaks. I had two clients, Earl Whitman, 60-something rancher from Texas with a custom rifle worth more than my truck, and his son Jared, about 30, quiet, the kind of man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They wanted an elk hunt deep in the Absaroka Range, a 4-day pack-in, no roads, no other hunters. I warned them the early storms were unpredictable, but they had money and time, and I needed both. We left trailhead at dawn, the horses steaming in the cold. The air smelled of pine sap and frost, and every sound carried too far. Our boots, the creak of saddle leather, even the soft thud of snow melting off branches. I've spent half my life out there, and still those mornings make me feel like a trespasser. The first day went fine. We rode up Deadwood Creek, crossed into the high basin below Rattlesnake Ridge, and made camp by dusk. The clients were decent enough. Earl drank from a silver flask, told stories about old hunts, while Jared fiddled with his phone until it lost signal. I stoked the fire and cooked elk chili from last year's meat. By the time stars came out, the ridge looked like a black wall against the sky. That's when the first odd thing happened. Nothing dramatic, just off. I went to check the horses before turning in. Both were restless, ears pinned, staring toward the tree line north of camp. I shined my headlamp. Nothing but spruce trunks and mist. I figured maybe a coyote, maybe the smell of something dead. Still, when I walked closer, the silence hit wrong. No insects, no night birds, not even wind. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing on your skin. Back at the fire, Earl was half asleep, but Jared asked if I'd seen anything. His tone wasn't casual, more like he expected an answer. I said no, probably an animal. He nodded slow. It's just, I thought I heard someone talking out there. We listened. Nothing. He laughed it off, said maybe he imagined it. I wanted to believe that. I wanted it enough that I told myself so twice. The second day we glassed the upper meadows. Tracks everywhere. Deer. A few wolves. It should have been good sign, but the animals were moving odd. Trails started, stopped, circled back on themselves. I even found a set of elk tracks that led straight into a patch of willows and vanished, like the herd just dissolved. I'd seen spooked game do strange things, but not this clean. Earl didn't notice. He was focused on bagging his bull. We spotted one around noon, a 6x6 across the valley. He wanted to stalk in. I told him we'd lose light, but he insisted. Money again. So we moved downwind, slow and careful. Snow flurries began. Small dry flakes that hissed when they hit your jacket. The valley hushed even more, that same wrong silence. Halfway through the stalk, I felt it, the sense of being watched, not by the elk. Something else. I kept scanning the ridge, but saw nothing. Then Jared touched my shoulder. "Dad," he whispered. "Look." Earl was 20 yards ahead, aiming at nothing. The elk was gone. Just gone. No sound of running, no broken brush. Earl lowered his rifle and looked back at me, confused. Where'd it go? I didn't know. We searched the valley until sunset, but found no sign. Not a track, not a drop of blood, not even the prints we'd followed earlier. It was as if the snow had erased them all in an instant. That night the temperature dropped hard. We huddled near the fire, listening to the wind moan through the ridges. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the horses snorting again. This time I stayed still, listening. There it was, faint, rhythmic crunching of boots on snow coming from the slope above camp. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, moved out quiet. The sound stopped the second I left the tent. My beam cut through fog and pine trunks, nothing moving. But then I caught a shape, a pale blur between trees human height, motionless. I froze. The light hit again, and it was gone. I stood there for maybe a minute, heart slamming, before I realized how far I'd walked. At least 50 yards from camp. When I turned back, I saw the glow of the fire through trees, and another smaller light flicker near it, like a lantern swinging. I called out, thinking maybe Jared was up. No answer. When I got back, both clients were asleep. No lantern, no movement. The fire had burned low. For a moment I wondered if I'd dreamed it, except for one thing. Fresh boot tracks leading from the edge of camp toward where I'd just been. 3 sets, mine, Earl's, Jared's, all accounted for. On the third day, the weather turned. Heavy snow by noon, low visibility. We broke camp and decided to head lower. It should have been a half-day ride back to the creek, but every ridge looked unfamiliar. My GPS flickered blank screen. Then coordinates that made no sense. I checked with compass and map. The bearings didn't match. I've gotten turned around before. It happens. But this was different. The land itself felt rearranged. The slope that should have faced east now dropped north. Drainage is bent wrong. I could feel the unease building in Jared. He kept glancing behind us like he expected someone to be there. Around mid-afternoon, we found an old camp. Fire ring half, rotted log benches, a tarp frozen under snow. Looked abandoned for years. But lying beside the fire ring was a metal thermos. When I brushed off the ice, I saw my own initials carved into it. DH, same model I lost last season. Earl thought I was joking when I went quiet. I wasn't. I had dropped the thermos 30 miles west near Torrey Creek. No way it drifted here. I didn't mention it. We rode on nerves high. The snow thickened, muffling everything. Once, the mules balked hard at a bend in the trail. When I forced them forward, I saw why. A carcass half buried in snow. Elk by the antlers. But no wounds, no bullet holes, no eyes wide open. Frozen solid. We moved fast after that. By evening, we reached a clearing that looked right for camp. The storm eased, leaving that eerie calm that comes before dusk. I built a quick fire, but wood smoked more than it burned. Jared asked quietly if we were still headed the right way. I told him yes, though I wasn't sure anymore. While I cooked, Earl wandered off to relieve himself. 10 minutes passed. 15. I started to worry. The forest swallowed sound. Even calling his name came back wrong, echoing from a direction that didn't match where I'd shouted. Finally, he stumbled out of the dark, pale and shaking. "Someone was out there," he said. I heard talking again. Thought it was you. But it was coming from under the snow. I wanted to believe he meant echo, trick of wind, anything normal. I really did. But when he pointed, I saw the drift he'd meant, long, low, shaped almost like a trench. There were holes in it, not animal burrows, but narrow vertical shafts like air vents. I told him to leave it alone. We moved the campfire closer to the tents and kept the horses tied tight. That night none of us slept. The wind picked up again, carrying voices that might have been our imagination. A low murmur, rising and falling like people whispering under a floor. I kept checking the time. 19:30, 20:10, 3:40. And every time I looked, the fire was lower than it should have been, as if something was breathing it down. Just before dawn, Jared sat up, wide-eyed. "There's someone standing over there," he whispered. I grabbed the rifle and flashlight, swung the beam toward the ridge. For a heartbeat, I saw a figure, coat, hood, face indistinct, standing perfectly still among the trees. Not moving, not turning, just there. When I blinked, it was gone. We left camp before sunrise, no breakfast, no talk. The horses fought the reins, eager to be anywhere else. My GPS still read nonsense. Even the sun seemed misplaced, rising where no map said it should. By late morning, the snow thinned. The forest opened into familiar terrain. Finally, mercifully, I recognized the creek valley. Relief hit so hard I almost laughed. But when I checked my watch, it said October 9th. We'd left the trailhead on the 6th, 3 nights, 4 days. Except Earl's satellite tracker, the one he used to ping his ranch, showed only 2 nights logged, as if one had been cut out. We didn't talk about it on the ride back. The men were pale, silent. When we reached their truck, Jared shook my hand without meeting my eyes. Earl just muttered, "You won't see us again." They were right. I still run hunts. Can't quit what I've done my whole life. But I don't guide that deep anymore. There's a stretch of timber north of Rattlesnake Ridge I mark red on my maps. No camps, no trails. When clients ask why, I tell them it's private land or too dangerous with bears. But that's not true. The truth is simpler and worse. Out there, something moves where land and time don't quite match. And once you've stepped inside it, it knows your name. When the Whitmans drove off, the sound of their tires faded too fast, swallowed by that wide Wyoming quiet. I stood beside my trailer a while, watching snowmelt drip from the hitch, feeling like I'd come back from a place that didn't line up with the rest of the map. The sky was thin blue, the kind that promises calm, but my hands still shook when I unlatched the horses. They were spent, sides lathered, eyes rolling whites. Even after we reached the stable, they wouldn't touch feed. I logged the trip that night like always. Dates, tags, miles covered, weather, no harvest. Routine on paper. But I couldn't bring myself to write the part about the missing day. My pen hung over the page, and all I could think about was that buried trench Earl had found. The way sound had carried wrong. I wrote, "Equipment malfunction," circled it twice and shut the book. The next morning, I went back to the shop to unload gear. The snow was melting fast. Mud sucked at my boots as I carried packs to the porch. That's when I noticed something off about one of the rifles. Earl's. He'd left it propped against the wall before climbing in his truck. Said he'd forgotten to case it. I'd planned to mail it back once he texted his address. But when I picked it up, I saw fresh scratches on the barrel. Small, shallow, almost like letters. I leaned closer. DH same as on that thermos. Same angle, same knife mark. I set the rifle down and walked away. Took a long time before I could go back to it. I locked it in the storage room. Haven't opened that cabinet since. Around noon, the sheriff came by. Tom Mathers, old friend of my dad's, still wore the same hat from 15 years ago. Said he'd gotten a call from the Whitmans. Claimed we'd turned around. Wanted to make sure I was all right. He chuckled like it was nothing, but when I told him about the dead elk and the silence, his smile faltered. "Up by Rattlesnake Ridge, huh?" he said, scratching his chin. "That country eats compasses, something in the rock iron. Maybe. You're not the first to get twisted around up there." He said it easy, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Before he left, he added, "If you head back that way, don't go north of the basin. GPS goes funny, radio too. Just old advice." That stuck with me. Old advice, like it wasn't his first time saying it. By evening, I'd convinced myself we'd just gotten lost. Nothing mystical about it. The human brain wants pattern, even when the land refuses it. But that night I dreamed of the snow again, except the air vents in the drift were breathing, slow, rhythmic. Each exhale fogged the dream world white until everything vanished. I woke before dawn, sweating. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered half asleep. Mr. Voice said, "Mail com. This is Ranger Vic Lorne with the Bridger District. You guided the Whitmans this week, correct?"
"Yeah."
"We got a call. They left behind an item, a pair of gloves, and asked if you'd found them." I looked around my small kitchen. On the table, right beside the coffee tin, lay a pair of tan leather gloves. I hadn't put them there. "Guess I did," I said slowly. "They must have fallen from their pack. Could you drop them by the ranger station today?" "Sure." "Appreciate it." He hung up without another word. The gloves were damp, like they'd been outside overnight. I set them on the counter and kept glancing at them while I packed up for town. By the time I got to the ranger office, the front desk was empty. A paper sign said closed for field ops. I left the gloves in a bag with a note. Driving back, the radio cut in and out. Every station hissed static except one. A local weather channel repeating the same phrase every few minutes. Unseasonal inversion layer expected in the upper valleys. Over and over, until I shut it off. When I reached my property, the horses were pacing. The younger one, Jenny, had torn her lead. Her nostrils flared, breath fogging heavy. I calmed her, checked the pen. That's when I saw tracks by the fence. Boot prints, small, leading from the trees and stopping right at the gate. They didn't leave. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, thin dusting. These prints sat on top of it. I followed them 5 steps before the air changed again, that same dense hush from the mountains. My ears rang. The sound of wind dimmed. I backed away slow, went inside, locked the door. By late afternoon, I decided to call Ranger Lorne back. The number was still in my log. I dialed. A woman answered. "No ranger by that name here," she said after checking. "You sure you got the right district?" I hung up without replying. The next few hours passed in a strange kind of stillness. I sharpened tools, mended tack, anything to stay busy. Around dusk, the dogs started barking. I stepped onto the porch. The ridge behind my cabin was glowing faintly, just a shimmer like moonlight bending wrong. No moon was out. I watched until it faded, maybe 30 seconds. Could have been reflection from ice crystals, I told myself. Science has words for every wonder if you say them fast enough. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a map spread out, tracing our route from the trip. I wanted proof it had been normal terrain. But when I reached the area north of Deadwood Creek, my pencil snagged on the paper. There was a ridge line drawn there I didn't remember, thin, marked in faint ink. Ridge 19. Not a name I'd ever seen. My maps came straight from USGS, printed that spring. I grabbed an older copy from the shelf. No Ridge 19. The new one, though, there it was. And right beside it, in tiny letters, survey pending, private lease, private. Out here that usually means mining rights or old logging plots. But I'd never seen equipment there. I decided I'd ride out in the morning, just to see. At dawn, frost silvered the grass. The air was so clear it hurt. I saddled Jenny, packed light. No clients, no schedule, just curiosity. Took the trail up through aspen, standstill gold despite the season. The sun crept over the range, turning snow peaks pink. For a while it felt normal again, like maybe the woods had forgiven me. Then, near the fork above Deadwood Creek, Jenny stopped dead. Ears forward, every muscle taut. I followed her gaze. In the distance, where the map showed Ridge 19, smoke curled through trees. Thin, steady, too pale for wood smoke. I tied her and went on foot. The closer I got, the quieter it became. Again that heavy silence, but sharper this time, like the air itself didn't want sound traveling. I crested a small rise and froze. There was a cabin down there, new build, plywood walls, metal roof, no windows. A chain link fence circled it, and on the gate hung a government-style sign, the kind with block letters PARO PARFUS. Geologa CRVY. No, dear sub. Funny thing was, the sign looked sun-bleached old, but the building hadn't weathered a day. I called out standard courtesy, and no reply. I didn't go closer. Something about the stillness felt wrong, like stepping nearer would draw attention I didn't want. I turned back toward Jenny. Halfway there, I saw boot prints crossing my own. Small, same size as those at my fence. That's when I heard the door of the cabin open behind me. Just a soft metal creak, nothing else. I didn't look back. I just walked fast, mounted, and rode until my legs cramped. Back home, I went straight to the sheriff's office. Tom wasn't there, but his deputy was. I asked if the USGS had a survey project up near Ridge 19. She looked it up. Nothing. Closest record was a soil study from 1998. When I mentioned the new cabin, she frowned. "You sure you weren't over near the old mine site? Folks see leftover sheds and think." "I know what I saw." She scribbled a note anyway. "I'll have Tom check it out when he's back." I didn't expect he would. That evening, I tried to rest, but the dogs wouldn't settle. Around midnight, one of them started growling low at the back door. I opened it just enough to shine my flashlight. The yard was empty. Then the beam caught something on the porch step. A pair of wet footprints, bare, leading up to the door and stopping there. No prints going away. I slammed it shut. Sat awake until dawn. Shotgun across my knees. When the sun rose, the prints were gone, porch dry. Only thing left was a smear of mud shaped like a handprint beside the doorframe. I scrubbed it off with bleach I didn't need. By mid-morning, a Ranger truck pulled up, older model, green stripe faded. 2 men inside, both in uniform but with no name tags. The driver leaned out, asked if I was Dale Hensley. Said they were following up on a reported trespass near government property. I told them yes, that I'd seen the cabin. The passenger wrote something on a clipboard, eyes hidden by dark glasses. That area's restricted, he said flatly. Survey equipment. Next time you see any structures, stay clear. Who's running the survey? I asked. Federal contractors. USGS? He smiled small and wrong. Something like that? Then they turned the truck around and left, tires crunching slow down the gravel. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail was 6 seconds of breathing, then a click. I tried to convince myself it was all connected to the survey. Some private project. Overzealous guards, coincidence stacked on coincidence. But when I stepped outside for air, I saw the faint glow on the ridge again. This time it pulsed. Slow. Like a signal, I went back in, locked everything, and poured a drink I didn't need. The next morning, the horses were gone. No broken fence, no tracks, just gone. I followed the dirt road for a mile, calling their names until my throat hurt. Nothing. When I turned back toward home, I noticed the frost on the grass had melted in a perfect circle around my cabin. Maybe 30 feet wide. That's when I realized something. The same circle size as the campfire clearing up by Rattlesnake Ridge. Same diameter, same shape, and whatever I'd walked out of up there, maybe it hadn't stayed behind. The circle around my cabin stayed there all morning, perfect as a compass ring. The frost melted only inside its boundary, even while the ground beyond stayed hard and silvered. I knelt at the edge, pressed my palm to the soil. Warm, damp, smelling of iron. I told myself it was geothermal seep, maybe a buried hot spring. But we weren't near any. I'd lived on this patch of land 12 years. Nothing about it had ever steamed in October. I marked the edge with a stick, stepped back, and fetched a thermometer from the barn. 58 degrees at the center, 32 at the edge. The kind of gradient that makes no sense in open air. I watched long enough for the sun to rise over the ridge. The light hit, and just like that, the ground went cold again. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Told myself I'd seen inversion pockets like that in Yellowstone. Nature's little trick shows. But I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching me back. Around 10, Sheriff Mathers finally showed up. Word travels quick in small towns, and I figured the deputy must have told him I'd been riled about the cabin. He parked in his usual cloud of dust and leaned against his door like he'd rather be anywhere else. Morning, Dale. Heard you found something strange up north. You could say that. I gestured toward the circle. He squinted, rubbed his jaw. Probably frost heave from old septic lines. There aren't any. Then maybe your soil's got gas pockets. He said it the way you talk to a horse that's half. Spook slow, reasonable. I told him about the ranger truck, about the 2 men with no names. His eyes shifted once quick. Best leave government property alone, he said. That ridge has been under one kind of permit or another for years. Surveyors, drillers, nobody really keeps track. He climbed back into his cruiser before I could answer. Take a few days off guiding, he added. Weather's turning anyway. Then he drove off, leaving twin tire marks slicing through the frost. By noon the wind kicked up. Loose pine needles swept across the yard like whispers. The air smelled metallic like rain without clouds. I tried to distract myself by mending a broken saddle, but the quiet pressed too close. Every few minutes, I swore I heard someone walking just behind the barn. Each time I looked, nothing there. At one point I found a scrap of paper wedged under the porch mat. Lined notebook paper, folded twice. Inside in clean block letters Rugi 19S Nato Am Apanau Goba CK, no signature. I burned it without thinking, then immediately regretted doing that. Evidence of what though? A warning, a prank, a test. The wind scattered the ashes across the circle. That evening I poured a drink, sat on the porch with my logbook, and opened to the last entry from the Whitman trip. For the first time, I noticed faint smudges on the margin. Not dirt, not water, but letters pressed so lightly they only showed in angled light. 3 initials VL Ranger Vic Lorne, the one who wasn't supposed to exist. My first thought was forgery. Maybe Earl had scribbled it as a joke, though that didn't fit the man's humor. Second thought, Maybe I'd done it in a half-sleep haze, a name my brain invented to give shape to fear. That's the trouble with guiding. Long nights alone in dark timber start teaching you the language of imagination whether you want it or not. Still, I found myself checking my phone call history. The number from that morning was still there. I tried it again. This time it rang 4 times, then clicked to an automated messaging. The number you have dialed is not in service. I listened twice. The voice reading the message was distorted, tinny hollow, like it had been recorded through water. I hung up. Later, just before dusk, I saw movement at the tree line behind my property. At first, I thought it was deer, a few dark shapes slipping through branches. But when I raised binoculars, I saw they weren't animals. 2 tall, moving upright. 3 figures evenly spaced, each carrying what looked like lanterns. They weren't coming closer, they were just standing, the light in their hands swaying side to side. I watched until my eyes burned. Eventually, they turned, all 3, and walked deeper into the forest. The lanterns bobbed once more and vanished. I told myself hunters. Lost probably, but no truck lights ever appeared on the access road. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the cabin felt amplified. Boards creaking, the old wall clock ticking too loud. At some point the tick stopped. The silence woke me. I checked the clock. 3:17 a.m. secondhand still. I reached up to tap the glass. The instant my finger touched it, the hand jumped forward and the power went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Even the window looked blind. I stayed still, waiting for the hum of the fridge, the click of the heater. Nothing. Outside, wind moaned through the ridge, and I caught a faint rhythmic pulse of light filtering through the trees again. One flash every few seconds. I wanted to believe it was a radio tower, except the nearest one was 20 miles away. The dogs started whining low, not barking, the sound they make when they sense something they can't place. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped to the window. My beam reflected off something just beyond the porch rail. Metal, small, round. I opened the door cautiously and bent to look. It was my thermos, the same one from the ridge, cleaned, polished, lid tightened, sitting neatly beside the step. I unscrewed it. The smell hit first, soil and iron damp. Inside wasn't coffee or water, but compacted dirt, dark and grainy. I poured a handful out and froze. Embedded in the dirt were thin slivers of bone. Not big, maybe squirrel, maybe bird, but arranged in a spiral. I set the thermos down carefully, heart hammering, locked every door again. By morning, the power was back as if nothing had happened. The clock blinked 1200. The thermos was gone. Only a ring of dirt marked where it'd been. That was the day I decided to drive into town and get out for a bit. I needed people, chatter, any proof that the world still moved in straight lines. Du Bois was half empty that Tuesday. Tourist season over, locals holed up for winter. I stopped by the diner for coffee. Martha, the owner, looked up with her usual half smile. "Haven't seen you in a spell, Dale. You look like you wrestled a ghost." "Maybe I did," I said before thinking. She chuckled, poured coffee. "You hear about those survey folks north of Rattlesnake? Sheriff says they're pulling equipment out next week. Whole thing got canceled." "Canceled?" That's what he said. Something about unstable ground. "Sinkholes, maybe." My stomach tightened. "They give a company name?" She shrugged. "Never do." When I stepped outside, a pickup I didn't recognize was parked across the street. Government plates, mud-caked. 2 men sat inside. Sunglasses again, even in shade. When I looked their way, the engine started and they drove off without signaling. I drove home slow. The road wound through the same canyon where we'd ridden on that first day with the Whitmans. The snow had melted enough to show tracks. Tire, boot, elk, all layered into confusion. Near the creek crossing, I noticed something carved into a pine trunk. Fresh, white bark exposed beneath the gouge 19. I pressed my thumb to it. Smooth. Recent. The rest of the drive, I kept thinking about numbers. Days missing, GPS coordinates that looped, radio channels repeating phrases. Patterns trying to speak through static. Back at the cabin, clouds were forming again, low and dirty. The dogs didn't come out to greet me. They just lay near the porch, heads low, eyes tracking the sky. I went inside to light the fire. The logbook was open on the table. I hadn't left it that way. A new entry filled half the page. Neat handwriting that wasn't mine. October 9th. Returned all accounted for. Proceed to next site. I stared until the words blurred. My hands were trembling so bad I dropped the book. When I picked it up again, the page was blank. I stepped outside for air. The ridge was glowing again, but brighter now, the pulse faster, almost like breathing. And under it, faint but rising, came that same murmur we'd heard beneath the snow. Voices overlapping, not loud, not angry, just constant. Then, for the first time, I could make out a few words. Not yet. Just that, carried on the wind. The light flared once more and vanished. The forest went back to black. I stood there until the cold bit through my coat. Until I could almost convince myself I'd imagined it all. Then I saw movement near the tree line. A man's silhouette, same height as me, same stance. When I lifted my flashlight, the beam hit his face. It was my own, for a split second, mirror clear, then gone. I backed into the house and didn't come out till morning. When I did, the circle in the frost was back. Only now, it wasn't empty. At the very center sat my logbook open to a fresh page. The first line read Day 4, Rattlesnake Ridge Survey, Lid D. Hensley. And below that, blank space waiting for the next entry. I stood there a long time, staring at the notebook. Morning light crept across the frost, but the circle didn't melt this time. The air had that charged stillness before a storm, though the sky was clear. I crouched, careful not to disturb the edge, and reached for the logbook. It was dry, warm to the touch. My handwriting covered half the last page, the line about Lid D. Hensley, written in the same steady block letters I use when filling permits. Only thing was, I hadn't written it. I checked the pen marks. The ink was still wet enough to smudge. I carried it inside, sat at the table, and compared it against old entries. The loops, the pressure, the slant, all mine. It looked like I'd written it in my sleep. I tried to reason it out. Maybe I'd been up late, half dreaming, jotting nonsense. Guides burn out all the time. Isolation, long hours. Mild hypoxia at altitude. There's a list of explanations for seeing things that aren't there. Still, the neatness of that page bothered me. My night handwriting is never neat. I set it aside, made coffee, and turned on the local radio, static. Every channel, even NOAA, which never fails in this area. Just a faint hiss, then fragments of a voice. Ridge return, 19. Before cutting out again, I shut it off. By 9, clouds began building over the range. High, thin, rolling fast. The wind had a different tone, less whistling. More like humming through wires. I saddled the spare mare, Belle, and rode out to check fence lines, trying to pretend routine still mattered. Halfway down the southern pasture, I saw fresh boot tracks near the drainage ditch. I thought at first it was Tom Mathers, but these were narrow, light prints, someone smaller, maybe a woman. They led toward the creek and ended at a half, collapsed beaver dam. The mud there was disturbed, churned like something heavy had been dragged across. I poked with a stick, half expecting to find a carcass. Instead, I pulled out a length of orange flagging tape, the kind surveyors use. Faded print on the side read USGS RI G19 Sandy C. The tape was new, bright, clean-cut edges, no algae. I folded it into my pocket and turned Belle around. The air smelled like rain again, sharp and metallic. Back home, I spread the tape beside the notebook. The lettering matched the ink color in the Lid D. Hensley line. It could have been coincidence. Same batch of markers, maybe. Except I don't own orange flagging tape around noon. A government pickup rolled into my drive. Same make as before, green stripe, no plates. The man who got out wasn't one of the two I'd met earlier. Younger, mid-30s, clean-shaven. He wore a Forest Service patch on his sleeve but no name tag. "Morning," he said easily. "You're Hensley." I nodded. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" "We're updating survey boundaries for soil reclamation." "Which department?" "Interagency." "Hard to explain." He smiled like that answered everything. He asked about the ridge, whether I'd noticed erosion, sinkholes, or unusual heat sources. His phrasing was clipped, rehearsed. I told him about the frost circle. He didn't react, just jotted notes. Then he said something that made me stop breathing for a second. "Did you recover any tagged equipment?" Thermos units signal beacons. I said no. He nodded once, pocketed his pad. If anything turns up, don't open it. They're calibrated for soil gas readings. Delicate. When he turned to leave, I noticed a scar along the back of his neck, pale against tan skin. Thin, circular like a burn. Hey, I called after him. What's Ridge 19? He paused, hand on his truck door. Old designation. Doesn't exist anymore. Then he drove off. The rest of the day blurred. I fixed a leaky pipe, sharpened knives, fed the dogs. But the rhythm of it felt staged, like muscle memory keeping time while my mind lagged behind. Every creak in the cabin made me glance at the window. At dusk, the wind shifted again. The smell of iron was back. The horses still hadn't returned. I decided to take the truck and check the trail where we'd first ridden out with the Whitmans. See if I could find sign of them or anything left behind. The road climbed steady for 8 miles. By the time I reached the pull-off near Deadwood Creek, night was dropping fast. I killed the engine, stepped out and listened. The forest sounded normal again. Wind through spruce, far off coyote. Relief eased something tight in my chest. I walked the creek bed, flashlight sweeping over half-frozen pools. After 20 minutes, I spotted something glinting under ice. I chipped it free with a rock. A small brass tag stamped with numbers 19CO4. Same style as survey stakes I'd seen in Yellowstone years ago. I turned it over. On the back, faint engraving DH. That time I didn't panic. I just stood there until my fingers went numb and whispered out loud, "Someone's screwing with me," saying it helped. Gave the fear edges I could grab. I pocketed the tag and started back to the truck. Halfway up the trail, my headlamp flickered. When it came back on, there was a shape standing in the beam, a mule, Jenny. She looked thinner but unharmed, halter still on. I reached out slow, talking to her the way I always did, low and steady. Her ears flicked, eyes white in the light. For a second, I thought she'd bolt. Then she took a hesitant step toward me. That's when I noticed the tag tied to her lead with wire. The same brass kind, 19CO5, untied it, pocketed both, and led her home. The next morning, I called Tom again. No answer. His deputy said he'd taken a trip south for a family matter. I asked if anyone else could check the ridge. She promised to pass it along but sounded doubtful. So I did what guides do when answers dry up. I checked things myself. I loaded the mule, strapped on snowshoes, and headed back toward the ridge under clear skies. I told myself it was closure, that I'd photograph the cabin, mark coordinates, send them to the state office, and be done. The forest looked cleaner than before, less snow, more open. I recognized landmarks, which calmed me some. But about 3 miles in, the GPS froze again, numbers spinning before locking on 19 degrees Ozaru, Lenza 109 degrees Ozaru. Pure coincidence. Impossible coordinates for this area. I shut it off. By mid-afternoon, I reached the rise overlooking the supposed site. The cabin was gone. No fence, no footprint, no cleared ground, just untouched snow. I checked twice, 3 times. Nothing. Then I heard a metallic ping behind me, like metal cooling after heat. I turned. A single survey stake stood where there hadn't been one a minute ago. Flagging tape fluttered orange against white. I walked over. The number on it read 19CO6, and under that, smaller print, CRV Wampliti. I pulled it out of the ground. Steam rose from the hole it left, faint but visible in the cold air. The snow hissed where it touched. I didn't stay to study it. I walked back to the mule, mounted, and rode until my knees hurt. By the time I reached home, dusk was sliding down the ridge. The circle around the cabin glowed faintly, not bright, just a sheen like damp stone. I tied Jenny in the barn, locked everything again, and sat inside with the 2 brass tags laid out on the table. They were warm. I turned them over. The back of the newer one didn't have my initials. It had a date, OCT-10. Tomorrow. I watched the fire until it burned out, the tags catching the last of the light. Then I put them in the same drawer as the rifle and shut it tight. When I finally slept, I dreamed of a ridge made of metal, hollow underneath, humming like wires in wind. In the dream, I was walking across it with a clipboard and orange tape in my pocket. A voice beside me said, "Lyd Hensley. Proceed to next site." I woke just before dawn, mouth dry, heart pounding. The room smelled faintly of ozone. Out the window, snow was falling again. Slow, heavy flakes spiraling straight down, not drifting. At the center of the yard, the frost circle filled itself with snow last as if reluctant. The radio crackled once more, faint under the hiss. Survey complete, a ridge 20. Then silence. I didn't answer. I just watched the snow erase the circle and thought about how much land out here is still listed as unmapped. Some places don't stay gone. They move until they find you again. The storm came in fast, a white wall rolling out of the high country before noon. By the time I'd shoveled a path to the barn, snow was already up to my knees, and the wind was carrying it sideways. Visibility maybe 30 feet. I'd seen plenty of Wyoming blizzards, but this one felt organized, like it knew exactly where my fence lines were and wanted to test each corner. I got the generator running, checked that Jenny had hay and water, then sealed the barn doors. She kept turning her head toward the ridge, snorting, stamping. Horses pick up pressure changes, but this was more than weather. I stroked her neck until she settled, though the whites of her eyes stayed showing. Inside the cabin, power flickered twice before steadying. The radio came alive for the first time in days. No voice, just a soft, steady hum at one frequency. I left it on. Sometimes constant sound helps keep the mind from drifting. At 3 o'clock, a truck engine passed on the highway, rare during a storm. When I looked out, I could barely make the taillights through the snow. Then they stopped at the end of my drive. Headlights swung toward the cabin. 2 figures got out, both in dark parkas, faces hidden by hoods. They moved with that clip precision you only see in people on duty. I stepped onto the porch, shotgun in one hand, made sure the gesture read defensive, not hostile. One of them raised a hand. Mr. Hensley. The voice was male, maybe the same one from the phone weeks back. Need to ask about your coordinates from last excursion. You filed a wildlife incident report, correct? I didn't file anything. He nodded, as though that confirms something. You'll want to stay inside until weather passes. Ground instability reported in your sector. Instability. Subsurface shift. Happens with thaw-freeze cycles. The second one stood silent, snow collecting on their hood. The first added, if you hear low-frequency noise tonight, don't go outside. It's atmospheric resonance, not structural failure. Harmless. He said it too quickly, like he'd practiced the line. Before I could ask anything else, they turned and walked back to the truck. The tires spun once, caught traction, and disappeared into the storm. I stood there a moment longer, the wind trying to tear the door from my hand. Then I went back in, bolted it, and wrote down every word they'd said. Guides live by notes. If you write it, it's real. By dusk, the hum on the radio deepened, pulsing in time with the wind. Jenny started pounding at the stall again, so I went out with a lantern. The snow was knee-high, reflecting the light so everything looked underwater. The horse stopped moving when I entered, ears flicking forward. Then I heard it, faint, below the wind, a deep, drawn-out tone like a distant engine running slow. I counted seconds between pulses. 9, then 9 again. Regular. Atmospheric resonance. I told myself out loud, the way you talk to a scared animal mostly for your own sake. But when I reached for Jenny's halter, the sound cut off, and every light in the barn flicked out, darkness thick as wool. I felt along the wall for the door. Then a glow rose outside, soft orange through the cracks, as if a fire had started in the yard. I shoved the door open. No fire. Just the snow circle again, its rim faintly luminous, steam drifting upward. The radio's hum was gone now, replaced by that same low tone vibrating through my boots. I forced myself to walk to the edge. The snow inside was melted to slush, bubbling slightly, like it sat over something warm. A rational man keeps the checklist going: gas leak, geothermal vent, buried power line. I ran through them all. None fit. I scooped a handful of water. It was warm, not boiling, just body temperature. Smelled faintly of iron again. When I looked up, the ridge flashed once with pale light, silent lightning, then black. The tone stopped. By morning, everything froze solid again. The circle vanished under crusted snow. I spent the next day fixing minor storm damage, roof shingles, loose hinges, pretending things were fine. But I kept finding more of those orange flagging ribbons, short strips half, buried along the fence line, each printed with numbers ending in 20. The newest read 2002, Ridge 20. I gathered them in a pile and burned them. The smoke smelled sweet chemical wrong. Late afternoon, I tried calling Tom again. No answer. The line rang once, then filled with faint whispering. Indistinct words overlapping. I hung up fast. After sundown, the generator sputtered and quit. I went out with the lantern to check fuel. Snow had stopped. Sky clear enough for stars. Everything looked peaceful. Then I noticed prints again, barefoot this time small, heading from the woods straight to the frost circle center. I followed them to the last print and saw a single object pressed into the snow, another brass tag. I picked it up with my glove. 20A03. Survia progress, no date. The wind shifted, carrying faint static. It took me a second to realize it wasn't wind. It was my radio, even though the generator was still off. Proceed. Sample zone A lead confirmed. I yanked the cord out of the wall. The sound kept going for another 3 beats, then died. I poured a drink I didn't finish and sat by the window until dawn. The stars above the ridge flickered in a line, not twinkle but deliberate flash, pause, flash, like someone signaling from a distance. At sunrise, I decided to hike out to the highway and flag down whoever came by. Enough pretending this was local. Snowshoes, pack, rifle, map. 2 miles in, I hit a stretch of trail where every tree trunk carried the same carved number 20. Some carved deep, some shallow, all fresh. The bark curls were still damp. I started marking direction with my own knife, a guide's habit for keeping bearings north, east. Everything felt subtly off, compass needle trembling between. Then I heard something behind me, footsteps matching my pace exactly. I turned quick, no one there. When I walked again, they resumed, crunch for crunch. After a half-mile of that, I stopped cold and shouted, "Who's out here?" Wind answered. I kept moving. The highway should have appeared after the next ridge. Instead, I came out into a clearing I didn't recognize, flat, open, bordered by half-buried metal posts. At the center stood a temporary weather mast, the kind used for environmental studies. Solar panel, antenna, flashing red light. A placard on the mast read 20 below it in small print Iliad Fi and Shimensia ID. I backed away, breath clouding. The placard was clean, no snow, no rust. Someone had installed it yesterday, maybe today. I circled once, looking for tire tracks, footprints, anything. The snow around it was untouched except for mine. That's when the red beacon flickered and went dark. The wind died with it. Absolute silence again. The kind that fills your ears like pressure. A single tone started up from beneath the ground, deep, steady, physical enough to feel in my ribs. I dropped to one knee trying to locate direction. The vibration ran through the soil toward the ridge. Then the snow shifted under me, not collapsing, just breathing, rising, falling. I stood and ran, didn't look back. By the time I reached home, daylight was failing. My watch said I'd been gone 3 hours, but the sun's position said 6. Inside, the power was on. The generator still silent. The radio dial glowed faint orange, though I hadn't touched it. A voice came through, calm, official. Field Technician Hensley. Data received confirmed. Ridge 20 sampling complete. Proceed to hold position. I froze. The tone, the cadence, it was my own voice. Recorded but altered flatter. The dogs barked from the porch. Sharp, frantic. I grabbed the rifle and stepped out. The frost circle was visible again under starlight, faint steam rising. The dogs stopped barking all at once. At the center of the circle, the snow bulged upward slightly, like something breathing just beneath. I aimed, useless gesture, and shouted, "What do you want?" The ground went still. Then, from under the snow, came that same low tone, drawn out, human in rhythm but not in sound. When it stopped, the steam drifted into the shape of words, only for a second before wind tore them apart. Next sight. I didn't move the rest of the night. When dawn came, the circle had frozen solid again. At its center lay a single new brass tag, 21A01. I didn't touch the new tag until the sun was high. It sat there at the center of the frozen circle, gold against white. No footprints, no drag marks, just placed like before. I walked slow, boots crunching loud in the silence, half expecting the ground to flex again. It didn't. When I bent down, the tag's surface reflected me clear enough to catch the lines around my eyes. The engraving read simple, 21A Zo1 Sarva Einentidindi. No initials, no date this time. I slipped it into a rag, wrapped it twice, and carried it inside. It was warm again, same body temperature heat as the others. I laid it on the table beside the previous tag, poured coffee I didn't taste, and tried to think like a sane man. The world had reasons. Always had. Maybe the tags were part of a long-range geological monitoring project, seismic data relays or ground penetration nodes. Maybe they used low-frequency sound waves, which could explain the humming, the vibrations, even the radio interference. The brass could hold residual heat from chemical reaction or battery cells. Every detail had an out if I worked at it. But none of that explained why my name kept showing up. By noon I decided to drive into town again. I loaded the tags in a metal box, locked the cabin, and took the long route down through the lower valley. The roads were clearer now, plows having come through after the storm. At the diner, same as always, Martha was setting out pies. She looked up when I walked in. "Well, you look better," she said. "Guess the weather didn't chew you up too bad." I sat at the counter, asked if Tom was back from his trip. "Came in last night," she said. "Looked worn out. Should be at the station today." I finished half a cup of coffee, then headed over. The sheriff's office sat quiet as a church, lights on, blinds half drawn. Through the window I saw Tom at his desk, head bent over paperwork. When I knocked, he flinched, not much but enough to notice. "Dale," he said, forcing a smile. "Back at it already?" Something like that. I set the box on his desk and flipped the latch. The brass tags glinted. "You ever seen anything like these?" He leaned forward, frown deepening. "Survey markers. Private or government. Could be either. They keep showing up on my property, with my name engraved." He picked one up, turned it over in the light. "Where'd you get these?" "I told you. My land. The ridge." Tom looked past me toward the window, then back. "You've had a rough few weeks, Dale. Storms mess with sleep, mess with perspective." "That's not an answer." He sighed, set the tag down. "Listen, off the record, there was an old experimental mapping project up that way back in the 70s. Ground sensors, magnetic resonance, something with seismic echoes. Never amounted to much. They pulled funding after a few equipment malfunctions. You're probably finding leftovers." "Leftovers don't stamp new numbers." He didn't reply. "Who ran the project?" I asked. He hesitated. "Some branch of the Geological Survey. Maybe Dewey." I was a kid. All I know is, folks said the sensors used low-frequency sound to read ground density. Kinda like sonar. Trouble was, they started picking up echoes that didn't fit the terrain model. Got shut down after that. "Echoes," I repeated. "That's what my old man said. Probably calibration errors. Anyway, if you've got equipment surfacing, I'll send someone to collect it. Just don't dig around out there. Not worth it." I left the tags with him and drove home. For a while, I almost convinced myself it was over. The road dust, the normal weight of steering, ordinary things felt like a return to gravity. But the closer I got to my property, the more my stomach knotted. Jenny was standing near the barn fence when I arrived, staring toward the ridge again. The air smelled faintly of metal, even without wind. Inside, I poured another coffee and opened the notebook. Blank page waited. I didn't want to write, but I knew I had to. Memory fades faster when you're scared. January 17, sheriff has tags. Possible old survey, ridge quiet. I set the pen down. Outside, the dogs started barking. The sound came from the direction of the old trail, short bursts, then silence. I grabbed the rifle and flashlight. The snow was crusted, hard enough to walk on. I followed the barking until it cut off mid-yelp. 50 yards from the tree line, I found one of the dogs, Rex, standing rigid, tail low. He wasn't hurt. He was staring straight ahead. I lifted the light. There, half buried in snow, was a metal stake with a small rectangular box attached by wire. A red diode blinked every few seconds. On the side, I crotched. The diode slowed, blinked twice, then steady. The label below it read Ridge 20 again. A thin cable ran from the node into the snow. I brushed it aside, expecting wire. Instead, My fingers hit something warm, smooth, metallic, but flexible running deep in the ground. I backed away. The diode went dark. The silence after was total. No wind, no trees creaking, just my pulse. Then my flashlight flickered and caught movement. A figure halfway up the ridge, dark coat, hood up, standing still. I shouted, "Who's there?" It didn't move. I blinked. It was gone. Back at the cabin, I double-checked locks, reset the radio on local weather just for company. Static again. But under it, a slow ticking started. Regular, patient, like a metronome. I pulled the cord. The ticking continued. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from outside. I opened the door. Snow falling light now, moon faint through cloud. The frost circle was visible again, but this time, 12 small red dots blinked evenly around its rim, half-buried sensors like the one I'd found, each pulsing in rhythm with the ticking. I stepped closer. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my boots. Not enough to move snow, just enough to feel in bone. I raised my phone to record. The second I hit the button, the vibration stopped. The dots went dark. I checked the screen, file corrupted. 0 seconds. I laughed once dry. Of course. Back inside, I sat by the fire until exhaustion won. Sometime near dawn, I woke to light in my window. Steady, not flickering. I went to the door. The sensors were gone. Not melted, not covered, just gone. But carved into the snow where the circle had been was a single word in block letters, cophorrorstories. By late morning, Tom called. "You said there were more tags." "Yeah. You have them." "No, I don't." "You took them yesterday." He paused. "I haven't seen you since before Christmas, Dale." I froze. "You sure about that?" "Positive. I was up in Jackson last 2 weeks." "Why?" The line crackled. For a second I thought I heard that same low tone behind his voice. Then it cut. I checked my cell log. The call showed no number, no duration. Just a blank space. I wrote that down too. That evening I decided to drive to the nearest ranger outpost, 30 miles east, past Torrey Creek. I packed essentials, rifle, radio, 2 days' rations. Before I left, I took one last look at the ridge through binoculars. There were no lights now, no signs of activity. Just snow and stone, wind scraping across peaks. I almost believed it was finished. Then, as I lowered the binoculars, I saw movement, a thin, vertical shift in the snow line, like something tall rising slowly from beneath, straight, backed, motionless. It stayed there for a count of 5, then sank back under. I kept the glass fixed on that spot long after. Nothing else moved. I told myself it was snowdrift, optical trick, brain overfiring from lack of sleep. I said it until it sounded dull enough to believe. The drive out was long and empty. Radio dead, phone dead. The sun sank behind the range, turning everything amber. When I finally saw the ranger outpost, it looked deserted. No vehicles, no tracks. I hunked once, waited. A minute later, the door opened. A woman stepped out in a ranger's coat. Name tag read Laurie. "Mr. Hensley," she said evenly. "You made it back." I didn't know there was an outpost staffed this late in the season. It would keep minimal coverage. "You've been conducting survey work." I stared. "Guiding hunts." She smiled faintly, polite but distracted. "Of course. Still, we appreciate the data uploads. They've been unusually consistent." "I haven't uploaded anything," her brow furrowed, as if she was the one confused now. "Your site logs say otherwise." She gestured toward a terminal inside the cabin, green cursor blinking. "Each location tag matches your coordinates." On the screen, my name scrolled past. Dozens of entries. Ridge 19, Ridge 20, Ridge 21. She glanced up. "Mr. Hensley, would you like to continue the program?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Outside, wind picked up again, carrying that same low vibration. Her radio crackled. A male voice, flat, calm, familiar, came through. "Field Technician Hensley, proceed to next site." The sound of my own voice. Lorne watched me, waiting for an answer I didn't have. I stared at the computer screen until the cursor blurred into one long green line. My name repeated down the log like someone had been copying and pasting it for Desa D. Radiji 19 Champia Chancellor ID. Radishakran Champlet ID. Raiji 20.0 Grass. Each entry carried a timestamp. Every night, 03:17 a.m. The same minute the clock in my cabin had frozen a week earlier. I stepped back from the terminal. Who entered those? Ranger Lorne's expression didn't change. The system uploads automatically. Each field unit records operator data from the transponder. I don't carry a transponder. She tilted her head. You sure about that? I opened my coat before I knew why. Nothing but fabric and body heat. Then she nodded toward my belt, my old GPS clip there, mud-caked. Same one that had been glitching for weeks. Mind if I check it? I handed it over. She turned it on, scrolled through minutes. A low hum filled the outpost, the same frequency I'd felt in the frost circles. Here, she said, rotating the screen. Under user ID it read FLTKICH HNSUID. Under active project 20 ITSQ. She looked at me as if expecting gratitude. That's some of the cleanest telemetry we've seen all quarter. I said nothing. Outside, wind dragged against the tin roof, long and even. The sound vibrated in my teeth. I want to know who authorized this project, I said finally. You're telling me my personal equipment's been transmitting under your system. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. The authorization chain isn't my department. I just monitor compliance. Compliance with what? She smiled a little, tired, sympathetic. You've been in the backcountry too long, Mr. Hensley. Sometimes the work gets ahead of us. Data can look personal when it's just pattern recognition. Pattern recognition. She said it like comfort. I asked to use her radio. She hesitated, then nodded toward the corner console. Static hissed through. I called dispatch, then county, then anyone. Every line answered with the same phrase, field site active. Hold position. Voices all different, words the same. I set the handset down carefully. Lorne watched me. Storm's rolling back in tonight. Roads'll close by dark. You can stay here till morning. I'm heading back. She didn't argue, just scribbled on a notepad, tore the page, and handed it over. Coordinates written in neat block letters 43.876 Enda 109 Die 383 Bosracelis 22. Next ridge over, she said. If you insist on chasing answers, that's where they'll be. Her tone wasn't threat or invitation, just fact. I pocketed the note, thanked her, and stepped into the cold. Snow began again almost immediately. Slow flakes at first, then heavy curtains swallowing the road. I drove until the tires spun in drifts, then switched to snowshoes and hiked the last mile. The ridge ahead looked untouched. No lights, no cabins, just the blue, gray of late afternoon pressing close. My compass pointed erratically, the needle twitching as though it wanted to run. Halfway up, I found a line of shallow pits carved into the snow. Each pit held a brass tag identical to the others, spaced 5 feet apart, numbers sequential, 21A03040 leading uphill. I followed them until the slope leveled into a clearing. At the center stood a tripod antenna, thin as a skeleton, guy wires humming in the wind. Beneath it, a metal box half buried in snow. The panel on its side read RED-E21, Fine El SAR-VY. A small keypad waited below. I brushed snow away. The display flickered enter lit ID. I hesitated, then typed till I said IED. The display blinked. Acknowledged. The ground gave a faint, soft shudder. Not an earthquake, just a deep settling, like something large exhaling beneath the crust. I took 3 steps back. My boots sank through snow into slush. Warm again, steam drifted up around the tripod legs. I smelled iron and wet stone. The box clicked. A printer inside began feeding out paper, narrow strip, numbers scrolling, temperature, pressure, coordinates, timestamps. At the bottom of the printout, a single line next to 43.881 and 19.390 RAG22. The same pattern as always, finish one. Start the next. For a second I almost laughed. All those nights thinking I'd stumbled into something cosmic. And it might just be bureaucratic momentum. Machines following orders no one remembered to cancel. I pulled the paper free, folded it, slipped it into my coat. All right, I said to no one. You win. I'm done. I turned downhill. Snow thickened, muting every step. The ridge disappeared behind a white curtain. I followed what should have been my trail, but the prints filled faster than I could walk. My breath came in bursts, chest burning. Somewhere above, the antenna's hum blended with wind until they sounded like the same thing. When I reached the tree line, I paused. The forest stretched dark and heavy below, familiar terrain. But another sound threaded through it, soft mechanical whirring, steady rhythm of an engine idling somewhere deep between the trunks. I crouched, listening. The smell of exhaust drifted faintly, then was gone. At the base of the first hill I saw light glinting under snow. I dug with my gloves until metal surfaced, the edge of a pickup door, white paint buried to the windows, my own license plate. For a moment I thought maybe I'd loop back without noticing. I scraped snow from the windshield. My reflection stared back, but the inside was empty, no gear. No tracks leading in or out. Just sitting there under 3 feet of drift like it had been parked months ago. I stood in the storm, heart thudding, breath fogging. The rational list collapsed one item at a time. That was when the radio inside the buried truck crackled. I leaned close. My voice, flat and measured. Ridge 21 complete. Proceed to Ridge 22. The transmission ended. I shut my eyes. The wind howled over the ridge again, dragging spindrift across my face. When I opened them, the antenna above had gone dark. Only the storm moved now. I left the truck half buried and walked the rest of the way down. By the time I reached the highway, the sky was clearing. Stars bright enough to hurt, every sound sharper in the cold. I could see the lights of town flickering 20 miles off. Civilization. I kept waiting for another vibration, another tone. Nothing came home. The circle in the yard was gone beneath new snow. The cabin looked ordinary again. Quiet smoke from the chimney, porch light steady. Inside, everything was where I'd left it. The clock on the wall ticked properly for the first time in weeks. I sat at the table, opened my logbook, turned to a blank page. For once, no writing had appeared on its own. I started slow. January 18, Ridge 21 visit complete. Equipment located, no anomalies. Possible residual magnetic field interference. Returning to standard guiding schedule, normal words factual. The kind a sane man writes. When I finished, I felt something close to peace. Not understanding, but acceptance. The way you accept winter or loss. I shut the book, poured a small drink, and listened to the stove crackle. Outside, the wind changed direction again, blowing down from the ridge. Just wind this time. Still, before I went to bed, I walked out once more. The snow reflected starlight so bright it looked alive. My boots crunched over the spot where the circle used to be. Nothing stirred. I stood there breathing cold air until my heartbeat slowed, then whispered the only thing I hadn't said since this started. I'm finished. The night gave no answer. Back inside, I set the GPS on the counter and turned it off. The screen faded to black. When I woke near dawn, sunlight spilled through the window, soft and ordinary. For the first time in months, no humming, no radio static, no movement on the ridge. The only sound was snow sliding from the roof. I made coffee, packed my gear, decided I'd drive east for a few weeks, visit my sister, let the land forget me. As I loaded the truck, I glanced once at the valley. Mist drifted above it, thin and gold. That was when my phone buzzed. Unknown number.
A text message? Where are the 22?
Servi a CTIHUSPNG. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I shut the phone off, slid it into the glove box, and drove toward the highway, windshield wipers beating steady, the world turning white behind me. Maybe it was true what Tom said. Some places in these mountains never got properly mapped. They keep redrawing themselves until the right person shows up to hold the pencil. I told myself I wouldn't go back, and maybe I won't. But sometimes, when the radio hums low on long drives, I still catch that voice, calm, bureaucratic, mine, checking coordinates. And I turn the volume down before it says the next site.